Hi everybody. Today we're going to start talking about the evidence of evolution. The first piece of evidence I'm going to talk about is something called homologous body structures. These are structures that have the same kind of design, but used in different ways. So, if we look at the diagram right here, what we see is bones, right? So all these animals kind of share the same bones. We have a frog, an alligator, a chicken, and a horse, right? And if we look at, the bone all the way at the end of the limb, which are like the phalanges, which is our fingers, right? Well, the frog and the alligator, they have phalanges or fingers, kind of resembling our own. However, by the time you get over to the chicken, you see that all the phalanges are kind of fused together to make a wingtip. And in the horse, they're fused together, but for a completely different function, and that's, to make the hoof of this animal. So here, we have the same structure, phalanges, we have the same bones, but they're used in different ways. Whether it's jumping, swimming, flying, or running. Right? What this does is it supports this idea of adaptive radiation, or common ancestry. You see, they've all evolved from a common ancestor, that's this ancient kind of like lobed fish. It was a fish that would kind of like walk along the bottom of the ocean on its fins, and that's where those bones all originated from. And each animal began to use the bones differently, and therefore inherited different characteristics. The second piece of evidence I want to talk about is another body structure, but these are analogous body structures. Right. These are body parts that have the same function, but a completely different design. It's kind of the opposite of homologous body structures. Right? And what this does is it supports this idea of convergent evolution, where two animals not necessarily closely related to each other through evolution, but they evolve similar characteristics because they come from the same environment. Right? So here we have the insect wing at the bottom here. And insects were the first organisms to, evolve, wings for flight. And today, insects are very good at flying. They have these wings that buzz around, they beat very, very quickly, and you watch an insect fly, it flies completely different than a bird or a bat. They can fly up and down, forwards and backwards, right? Have you ever seen a bird besides a hummingbird try to fly backwards? They can't do it. Their wings aren't designed that way. Right? So they have a completely different designed wing with bones and feathers and things like that are more designed for soaring. Birds always have to be moving forward to take flight, right? Where an insect doesn't. And then you have the bat. The bat is like kind of like the newest group of organisms to learn to fly. Again, completely different wing design. So they have these very, very, very long bones that are very, very thin throughout their wings. They have flaps of skin instead of feathers. And if you've ever seen a bat fly, it's not very graceful. They're constantly fluttering. They can't soar like a bird and save that energy, but it just means that the birds didn't pass on this trait of flight to the bats. The bats evolved it all on their own because, their environment demanded it for their survival and reproduction. The next body structure I want to talk about is something called vestigial body structures. And these are body parts that used to be very, very important, right, in earlier forms of the organism. But as the organisms change, the importance of these body structures becomes less and less. So an example of this would be like our appendix, right? It's this little kind of thing that hangs off of our large intestine. And it doesn't do anything. That's why, some people get it removed, and it has no negative consequences of removing your appendix, right? But back in earlier forms of humans, the appendix probably helped with digestion of some sort, yeah? Have you ever had your wisdom teeth out? Again, it's another useless body part that today causes more harm, but again, in earlier forms of human, our jaws used to be bigger. Alright, and, by the time you reach adulthood, you probably wouldn't have a full set of teeth. So wisdom teeth probably would be very, very helpful as they kind of popped up later on in life. And then, we still have a tailbone, but no tail, right? So what used to be our tails now fused together what we call our coccyx. So all of these are parts of a human body that are vestigial. They're no longer very, very functional, but they used to be important in the past. Another great example of vestigial structure, if you look at this giant whale, part of its skeleton is these teeny tiny hind legs right here towards the back end of the whale. Again, completely useless for the whale today, but scientists believe that whales evolved from a wolf-like ancestor that lived on land, right? And this is what's left of its hind limbs today. The next piece of evidence I want to talk about is embryology, right? So if you're looking at the embryos of various animals, so here are the embryos of fish, salamander, turtle, chickens, rabbits, and humans, they all initially look alike. Now, as the embryos develop, we begin seeing changes when two animals aren't closely related to each other. So here's a human, right? And we see that the human, the rabbit, and even the chicken still look pretty much alike. However, the fish and the salamander look very different. And that means that the fish and salamander might be close related to each other, but not very closely related to a human. And then, even towards the very late stages of embryology, we see that the human and the rabbit look shockingly similar as embryos. And it just means that the humans and the rabbit share a more recent common ancestor than any of these other organisms. The final piece of evidence I want to talk about is genetics. Right? Remember that all living things share the exact same genetic code. For example, if you have the mRNA sequence AAA, you're going to get the amino acid lysine. And AAA is always lysine. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a human, a rabbit, a chicken, whatever organism there is on the planet, AAA is only lysine. The only reason why AAA should be lysine is because we all share a common ancestor. That ancient population of bacteria that lived 3.5 billion years ago. And they passed that same genetic code on to all living things around the planet today. Okay? So we can look at the DNA of various organisms, and if they have a similar DNA sequence, we can assume that they have a more recent common ancestor. Alright guys, that's it for today's lesson. Thank you.